Every day, another clip spreads across the internet. A woman sitting in her car, phone balanced on the dashboard, crying because the day unraveled faster than she could hold it together. Another breaking down over a bill she didn't anticipate. Another overwhelmed by a problem she doesn't know how to solve. The comments rush in with sympathy and reassurance, but something far more important slips past unnoticed. These emotional collapses aren't rare anymore. They've become familiar, almost expected, and they aren't random. They're signs of a deeper conditioning that leaves people unprepared for the reality they say they want freedom from. The real question isn't why life feels so hard. It's why so many were taught to expect it to be easy. Once you see that, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. You've seen these moments before. A woman overwhelmed because the daycare called again, and work deadlines are stacking up. Another staring at a grocery receipt, trying to decide which payment can wait until next month. Sometimes it's a flat tire on the side of the road, a landlord who won't respond, or a small repair that suddenly feels like a disaster. None of these situations are extraordinary. They happen every day to millions of people. Yet for some, they trigger reactions that look like everything is falling apart. What's happening in those moments isn't tragedy, it's overload. When someone hasn't developed the inner structure to separate inconvenience from catastrophe, every inconvenience becomes a catastrophe. A sick child stops being just a sick child and turns into proof of being alone. A repair bill isn't just an expense, it becomes evidence that life is unfair. A flat tire isn't a simple problem to solve, it becomes confirmation that she can't manage her own life. These reactions aren't about life being unbearable. Billions of people face the same responsibilities without collapsing in public. The real issue is the widening gap between expectation and capability. Many women were raised to believe adulthood would feel empowering, intuitive, expressive, and that support would always appear when it was needed. Real life doesn't operate on feelings. It doesn't soften itself because someone feels overwhelmed. And when basic responsibilities repeatedly push someone past their emotional limit, it's not because those responsibilities are too heavy. It's because the foundation required to carry them was never built. Collapse doesn't begin with disaster. It begins with the inability to handle the ordinary. Some women don't stumble into chaos. They choose it, convinced it will feel like freedom. They leave stable relationships, dependable partners, or structured lives because they believe independence will be effortless, glamorous, and emotionally fulfilling. The idea sounds powerful. No rules, no compromises, no accountability, just self-discovery and personal freedom. But that vision isn't grounded in reality. It's grounded in emotion, intense, seductive, and deeply misleading. Social media reinforces the illusion. It presents independence as an aesthetic. Carefully framed coffee cups, spontaneous trips, quotes about reclaiming power and living your truth. None of it shows the real cost. The rent that doesn't pause, the workload that doesn't care about your mood, the logistics that don't disappear because you wanted something different. It never shows the nights when the kids are sick and you're the only adult there, or the pressure that keeps coming regardless of how empowered you feel. Freedom built on emotion instead of structure always collapses because it was never freedom. It was escape. And escape only feels good until reality catches up. When responsibilities that were once shared suddenly double in weight, the fantasy breaks. When the emotional labor that went unnoticed now belongs entirely to one person, the illusion dissolves. The same women who insisted they didn't need support often find themselves drowning in tasks that used to feel invisible. This isn't about blaming women or idealizing men. It's about misunderstanding what independence actually requires. Real independence demands discipline, planning, resilience, and emotional steadiness. Without those qualities, freedom doesn't elevate, it destabilizes. What looked like liberation turns into disorganization, exhaustion, and anxiety. Independence without structure isn't empowerment. It's chaos dressed up to look appealing. Reality doesn't arrive with drama. It doesn't announce itself. It just shows up quietly in the form of everyday responsibilities that used to be handled, shared, or absorbed by someone else. Suddenly, the life that once felt restrictive reveals itself as the framework that kept everything running. And without that framework, Even simple tasks start to feel overwhelming. The daily obligations hit hardest. Coordinating schedules while answering work emails, dealing with contractors who don't call back, managing paperwork, appointments, and endless small decisions, keeping everything moving when everyone is tired, stressed, or sick. These parts of life don't reward emotion. They demand consistency, clarity, and calm under pressure. When those traits aren't developed, the smallest disruption feels like a crisis. Then there's the mental load, something many don't fully understand until they're carrying it alone. The constant planning, anticipating problems, making decisions before issues even surface. Without support, it turns into relentless decision fatigue. The mind stops distinguishing between what's urgent and what's merely inconvenient. Everything blends together into one overwhelming noise. That's when emotional flooding sets in. Logic fades, stress spikes, and minor problems feel unmanageable. In that moment, many women realize something they never fully acknowledged before. A partner wasn't just helping with tasks, he was stabilizing the environment. He absorbed pressure. He handled problems quietly. He created predictability. He managed logistics without making it visible. And without that presence, life doesn't just become harder, it becomes relentless. Reality isn't cruel, it isn't punishing anyone. It simply reflects the preparation someone has or doesn't have. When emotional expectations collide with structural demands, something has to give. And too often, it's the person who was never taught that strength isn't a feeling. It's a skill built over time. Real independence isn't about doing everything alone. It's about being capable, steady, and grounded enough to handle life without falling apart when it stops feeling easy. Reality doesn't ask how overwhelmed someone feels before it moves forward. It simply expects adults to cope, plan, endure, and adapt. Those who are prepared step into that role without applause. Those who aren't feel buried by responsibilities that millions of people manage every single day. Reality isn't biased or cruel. It doesn't single anyone out. It just reveals who is ready and who never had to become ready. And that exposure can feel brutal to someone who was shielded from it for too long. There's an important distinction that has almost vanished in modern culture: the difference between being overwhelmed and performing overwhelm. Feeling stressed is human. Turning that stress into a spectacle is something else entirely. More and more women have learned that the fastest way to receive attention, validation, and emotional rescue isn't to process their problems or solve them, but to record them. A phone balanced on the dashboard, tears flowing, a trembling voice explaining how everything feels impossible, a shaky confession that they can't do this anymore. The camera stops being a tool and becomes a stage. The breakdown stops being private and turns into a performance designed to trigger sympathy, reassurance, and endless affirmation. This pattern didn't appear by accident. It was taught, rewarded, and reinforced. Every time a public meltdown is met with thousands of comments praising bravery, strength, and vulnerability, the lesson sinks deeper. Struggle becomes social currency. Emotional exposure becomes content. Instability becomes identity. What few people stop to consider is the psychological trap underneath it all. Whatever gets rewarded gets repeated. When broadcasting pain brings more comfort than quietly fixing problems, the mind naturally chooses the path of least resistance. It becomes easier to post distress than to confront it, safer to collect digital empathy than to build real resilience. But none of this actually solves anything. The bills don't disappear. The kids still need structure. The responsibilities don't shrink because someone cried into a camera. The only thing that changes is the mindset. The belief that showing distress is enough, that validation can replace strength. Turning struggle into a performance doesn't reduce the weight of life. It just delays the moment when action is required. And that moment always comes. Reality waits patiently, but it never forgets. There's a form of stability many people never fully recognize until it's gone. It isn't dramatic or romantic. It doesn't announce itself. It's the quiet, consistent structure men often provide, the kind that keeps a household functioning even when no one is paying attention. When that structure disappears, the cracks show immediately. Men bring predictability not because they're flawless, but because they tend to operate through routine, logic and problem solving. They handle the uncelebrated work, setting boundaries, enforcing rules, staying calm in emergencies, making decisions when emotions are high, fixing what breaks, carrying the heavy weight, both physical and psychological. This isn't just labor, it's emotional containment, it's grounding. When a man is present in that role, chaos has less room to grow. Children know what to expect. The home has rhythm. Problems are addressed before they spiral. Stress is shared instead of concentrated. And because so many men do this quietly and consistently, their contribution becomes invisible until the day it's no longer there. That's when reality shifts sharply. Without that stabilizing force, the household becomes reactive instead of organized. Routines slip, boundaries blur, minor inconveniences turn into emotional events. Simple tasks drain the entire system. This doesn't happen because women are incapable. It happens because many were never taught how to create structure on their own. They were encouraged to express, to feel, to process, but not to stabilize. When male structure disappears, it doesn't just create disorder, it exposes the hidden weight that was being carried all along. And no amount of empowerment language or independent slogans can replace that overnight. Stability isn't a feeling, it's a skill. And when the person holding that skill leaves, the impact isn't subtle, it hits like a shock wave. When life starts unraveling, the first instinct for many people is to look outward instead of inward. For a growing number of women, that instinct hardens into a pattern, a consistent refusal to examine their role in the outcomes they're facing. Instead of asking what needs to be corrected internally, the mind jumps to who failed them this time. The target changes constantly. An ex-partner who doesn't help enough, a job that doesn't pay what it should, a system that asks too much, a family that doesn't show up, an economy that feels unfair. The list never ends because the emotion driving it isn't about circumstance. It's about avoidance. Taking responsibility hurts. It forces someone to look directly at the choices, habits, and behaviors that contributed to where they are. It demands emotional maturity, the ability to sit with discomfort without deflecting it. And maturity is like a muscle. When it isn't used, it weakens. This is why ownership feels so rare now. Many women were raised to believe their feelings define reality, that intentions matter more than actions, and that struggle excuses reaction. In that framework, responsibility feels like an attack rather than an opportunity. Accountability feels like criticism instead of growth. But there's a price for that mindset. When someone refuses to carry responsibility, it doesn't disappear. It gets transferred. Someone else has to hold it. And too often, men become the default carriers, stepping in to manage crises they didn't create, stabilize situations they didn't cause, and absorb chaos that was entirely avoidable. That isn't partnership. It's emotional outsourcing. A life built on blame always collapses eventually, not because help isn't available, but because no one can live someone else's adulthood for them. And when one adult collapses under the weight they avoided, the fallout never stays contained. It spreads outward, quietly at first, then relentlessly, and the first place it lands is on the children. Long before anyone names it or notices the damage, kids begin adapting to an emotional environment that feels unstable. They don't understand adult stress, but they feel it in the air. They absorb it through tone, tension, and unpredictability. They reorganize their inner world around it, learning to stay alert instead of at ease. When a home lacks structure, children lose their sense of safety. Bedtimes drift. Rules change depending on the mood of the day. Boundaries soften, then disappear. What should be predictable becomes uncertain, and uncertainty is the fastest way to generate anxiety in a developing mind. A child needs to know what comes next. When they don't, their bodies carry that stress the same way adults carry debt, quietly accumulating, growing heavier over time, impossible to ignore. And when a mother is overwhelmed, the emotional balance often flips. The child becomes the caretaker. You see it in the oldest sibling who steps into a parental role before they understand what childhood is supposed to feel like. You see it in the little boy who consoles his mother instead of running outside to play. You see it in the little girl who learns to read emotional shifts before she learns to read words. These aren't signs of maturity. They're warning signals. The presence of rotating male figures, only intensifies the confusion. Children don't know who holds authority, who they can trust, or whose rules matter. Stability never has a chance to take root. Over time, that instability becomes part of who they are. Years later, in therapy rooms across the country, these children show up as teenagers carrying resentment, guilt, emotional numbness, or forced independence. They learned too early that no one else would hold the structure for them. This is the generational cost no one wants to confront. A woman's collapse isn't isolated. It reshapes the emotional blueprint of the next generation. Children don't become resilient by witnessing chaos. They become anxious, reactive, and uncertain about their place in the world. Disorder doesn't just exhaust adults, it quietly raises wounded children. Men, on the other hand, don't announce their withdrawal. They don't give speeches about being done or record emotional explanations for why they're stepping back. They simply disengage, calmly, predictably, and once they do, they rarely return. More men are opting out, not because they fear commitment, but because they fear becoming someone's emotional life raft. They've seen the pattern repeat too many times. A woman claims independence, crumbles under routine responsibilities, then turns to the nearest man expecting him to absorb the chaos she created, not as a partner, but as a utility. Men notice patterns. They pay attention to how someone reacts to minor pressure, how they manage daily responsibilities, how quickly blame replaces ownership. They see the breakdowns over ordinary inconveniences, the chaos reframed as strength, the instability recycled across relationships. They understand exactly what it means when someone is overwhelmed by life before a partnership even begins. So they adapt, they screen, they observe how a woman organizes her life, how she handles stress, how she regulates emotion, how she talks about her past. They avoid being positioned as future cleanup crews. They step away from dynamics where effort won't be reciprocated, where stability will be consumed instead of valued. This withdrawal isn't cruel or vindictive, it's strategic. A man who has spent years carrying uneven responsibility eventually understands the cost. Once that cost becomes clear, he refuses to pay it again. As more men step back, the dating landscape shifts. Women who collapse under daily life struggle to find partners willing to step into that chaos. The environment becomes harsher, not because men lost empathy, but because they learned self-preservation. Not every woman collapses when life becomes heavy. There's a quieter group that rarely gets attention, the ones who rise. You don't see them broadcasting meltdowns or turning hardship into content. They don't claim perfection, and they don't pretend life is gentle. They meet reality with discipline and emotional steadiness. Their strength isn't loud, it's deliberate. They understand that adulthood doesn't reward feelings, it rewards consistency. They plan, they budget, they build routines that prevent chaos instead of reacting to it. They regulate their emotions without expecting the world to pause and comfort them. When things go wrong, they hold themselves accountable. Instead of asking who should fix the problem, they ask how to fix it. Their relationships reflect that mindset. They don't chase intensity or fantasy. They choose partners based on character, reliability, and long-term alignment. They understand the value of structure because they've built it themselves. They contribute rather than consume. They look for reciprocity, not rescue. What makes them rare isn't ability, it's conditioning. Society doesn't reward their approach. It doesn't celebrate quiet competence or discipline. It amplifies drama, encourages emotional exposure, and normalizes irresponsibility. Women who rise don't fit that narrative. They receive less attention, but far more respect. And men notice immediately. These women move differently. They think differently. Their presence brings calm instead of turbulence. Their lives have order, not constant crisis. Because they've developed real resilience, they can truly partner with a man instead of leaning on him to compensate for instability. They're the exception in a culture that often confuses collapse with courage. And in the long run, they're the ones who build lives that don't fall apart when reality applies pressure. That's exactly why men value them. There comes a point where clarity becomes non-negotiable. After watching enough relationships unravel under emotional volatility, impulsive decisions, and endless blame shifting, patterns stop being subtle. They become obvious. And once you can see them clearly, ignoring them isn't kindness, it's self-destruction. Certain behaviors reveal everything long before commitment ever enters the picture. Pay attention to how a woman reacts to small stressors. If a minor inconvenience sparks panic, tears, or dramatic retelling, that response isn't isolated. It's a preview. Life doesn't get gentler over time, it gets heavier. How someone handles the small weight tells you exactly how they'll handle the large one. Notice whether responsibility is owned or immediately redirected. If every problem is someone else's fault, eventually that blame will land on you. Look closely at daily habits. Is her life ordered or constantly in disarray? Does she follow through, manage her time, handle money responsibly, and keep commitments? Or is she always scrambling, overwhelmed, and expecting someone else to stabilize what she refuses to structure herself? Disorder in everyday life never stays contained. It always spills into the relationship. Chaos doesn't turn off when romance begins. Listen to how she speaks about her past. If every ex was toxic, every friendship ended in betrayal, every workplace was unfair, there's a common thread running through all of it. And it isn't bad luck. Patterns don't lie. Above all, observe whether she seeks solutions or sympathy. One path leads to growth, the other leads to collapse. Men aren't meant to be saviors. They aren't emotional shock absorbers or stability machines. A relationship is a partnership, not a rescue operation. When you choose someone who destabilizes herself, you sign up to absorb the consequences. Not every woman collapses under pressure, but the ones who do share unmistakable signals. The sooner those signals are recognized, the sooner a man can protect his energy, his stability, and his future. Choice matters. Foresight matters. A life that requires your constant sacrifice of peace, purpose, and identity isn't love. It's erosion. In the end, the pattern is impossible to ignore. Life didn't suddenly become harsher. It has always required discipline, endurance, and emotional steadiness. What changed was conditioning. A generation was taught to prioritize expression over resilience, validation over responsibility, and comfort over preparation. When those lessons collide with adulthood, collapse feels shocking, but it's not random. It's the predictable outcome of avoiding reality. Collapse isn't destiny, it's consequence. And consequences can be prevented, but never escaped through denial. Every day people decide who they're becoming through the habits they reinforce, the standards they uphold, and the accountability they accept. Some choose growth, others choose blame. Some build strength that carries them through difficulty. Others demand sympathy and call it empowerment. The outcomes don't need explanation. They speak for themselves. For men listening, understand this clearly. You are not required to carry someone else's instability. You are not obligated to clean up chaos you didn't create. You don't have to trade your peace for unresolved patterns disguised as potential. Your role is partnership, not self-erasure. Protect your boundaries. Protect your discernment. Protect the structure you work to build. Clarity isn't cold, it's survival. And for the women who hear this without defensiveness, the path forward is wide open. Accountability isn't punishment, it's freedom. When you stop outsourcing blame, you reclaim control. When you stop turning struggle into performance, you begin building real strength. When you take ownership of your choices, life stops feeling overwhelming and starts becoming manageable. Growth begins the moment negotiation with reality ends. Reality doesn't bend. It doesn't pause. It doesn't soften itself to match anyone's emotional state. It rewards competence, stability, and preparation. And it punishes denial every time. You adapt or you collapse. That truth has no bias. It applies to everyone. If you've seen these patterns in your own life or watched someone fall apart under responsibilities they never prepared for, speak on it. Conversations like this can't stay buried anymore. They help men make better choices. They help women see themselves clearly. And they expose the uncomfortable truths modern culture keeps trying to ignore. If this message resonated, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Add your voice. Clarity grows when people stop pretending.